into it. They were like, the world knows what it's like to just lose half of everyone in an instant. And like now they're dealing with fight. So like, and you know, obviously we had the pandemic. So it's like we were in the pandemic for 1 year.
Yeah.
Like that's 5 times as long. So it's like, imagine if we lost half the population. We just assume they're gone forever and never coming back. And it's like, what does that do to the rest of the world? You know? So like, it's crazy. And they played with that a little bit in Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I thought was well done. And I think they'll get into it a little bit more kind of as we go through, you know?
Yeah, actually, I mean, they did it a little bit in WandaVision, too. I mean, just in a smaller scale because it was more focused on that area as opposed to more worldwide stuff. But, yeah, I mean, it's and that's something you don't, honestly, sometimes you don't even think about that, or you're not thinking about that during that movie. But they get into it in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the political ramifications, just what happens now. Like you said, 5 years, that's... You move on, you move to a different house, all of a sudden you're sitting there eating breakfast and plop, you know, they return.
Right.
And what do you do? And it's like, yeah, this is great and all, and people have loved ones, but it's like, imagine if you come back and your wife moved on, you know, and remarried or met someone else or your husband or whoever. And all of a sudden you're thinking about it like, wow, there's a lot of different just offshoots of what happened when they just brought everyone back. But at the time we're thinking, you know, they're bringing everyone back. And again, watching that in theaters, the return, the build up, and it's like, and even watching it now. Exactly. Even watching it now, you still get that feeling and you still kind of get those chills. And that's really the mark of a great movie, and you know why I put it so high. I mean, again, I still think Infinity War is better, but it's like, if you're gonna say we're putting this on instead of that, I'm like, sure, why not? I'm probably gonna watch it I mean, we're recording this fairly late at night. It's gonna be about midnight by the time I start this, but I'm gonna probably put it on. It's Thursday night, whatever. I got to do a radio show in the morning. I can do that on little sleep, but I'm getting amped up. I want to watch Endgame again because I just want to see the cold open and go from there. So,
well, you know, it's funny because you mentioned like loved ones coming back, and I just brought me back to Castaway when, you know, Tom Hanks does all this to survive, and then comes back, and you know the love of his life has moved on, right? And it's like, it's not her fault. Like she's an absolute wreck. Like she's a mess. She just assumed he was dead. They had a funeral for him and everything. Like, you know, and so it's like same thing. It's like, you know, what do you want us to do? It's been 5 years. Like, you all of a sudden you were just gone, right? And like we were just like, well, the Avengers lost, and you're just never coming back. You know, like it was just, and then all of a sudden you come back, and it's like, okay, like, but now what? And like for those people that were gone, it's an instant, right? So they didn't know they were gone. So it's even worse because you didn't have to survive for 5 years somewhere else. You were just gone, and then one instant you come back, and it's 5 years later, and you're like, what? Like, what do you mean it's 5 years later? You know, so like. That's where it, you know, there's so many of those different things, and I wonder if they're going to play with some of that stuff because, yeah, the disorientation that comes back with, you know, the hospital scene in WandaVision was amazing because people just running around like, what the hell's going on? Like, what's happening? You know, and for all that to happen is just kind of crazy to think about. Like, okay, what if people were in situations? What if people were, you know, in compromising situations, or what if people were driving or flying a plane? Right. And that's the thing, you know, so it's like, where do they show up? And so like those things, and it's hard to touch all of it, of course, but to get into some of those like personal relationship things could be powerful to, you know, to kind of talk about, you know, this person was here, and then 5 years later, it's like, well, like, sorry, but I've moved on, you know, like my life ended when you left, but like I grieved for 3 years, and now 2 years later, it's like, you know, so it's like, it's wild.
In WandaVision, they kind of answered what technically happened. Not technically happened, but like you said, they just appeared back to where they were. And then we got more of an insight. Okay, she obviously thought she just dozed off, you know, for a couple minutes, and that was that. And it turns out to be 5 years. So obviously Scott, different situation with Scott being in the, you know,
right.
You know, there, yeah, he had to figure things out, obviously, but it was a little bit different situation. But we learn, and obviously in Spider-Man 2, Not Spider-Man 2, but you know what I mean. Spider-Man
Yeah.
TOO.
Yeah.
That, people just appeared back where they were. Just whatever they were doing at the time, just boop, there they were. So it'll be interesting to see how they played with it. Obviously, that was a kind of a big plot point. It was a subplot, but a large subplot in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Obviously, the biggest problem that these governments were having was re-implementing all these people. They were called refugees, so on and so forth. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play with that moving forward, because we're only scratching the surface with that. I think we're going to get a little bit more detail of how that all works out. With Loki moving forward. But I do want to get back to the rankings here, because I think I'm looking at mine, I'm comparing mine, and for the most part, I see where I don't think there's really any surprises. And that's the thing, it's pretty consistent. I thought maybe people ranked Iron Man 2 pretty low. I was surprised to see it as the third worst movie. I actually kind of like that one, and people are, oh, you like it? I'm like,
it's okay. It's not. Yeah, it's okay.
It's not great. I mean, it's not terrible. I I don't know what it is. Maybe it's Mickey Rourke. I don't know. But that whole ridiculousness. But
people have Ant-Man lower than I would. The two Ant-Man movies, I like those movies. They are a little silly.
Yeah.
They're not
but I like that though.
But they're fun. And Paul Rudd's amazing. And so those two movies I like more than where they are. The biggest surprise to me was Far From Home was 10. Mm-hmm. And Homecoming was all the way down to 15, which was really surprising to me, because I think Homecoming is a little bit better than Far From Home, but I think they're both pretty on par. And I have them around around that area, like 10, 11, 12. But just to see them so far apart from each other was surprising to me, because I just thought they're very similar movies. And they both have, I think Far From Home, the ending scene in Far From Home with the bridge, mm-hmm. that to me is the epitome of Peter Parker. That's what he does. Mm-hmm. When he blocks everything out and he's fighting, Mysterio, and it's just off of the spider sense, right? Mm-hmm. He doesn't see anything. He closes his eyes and he just feels his way through it. And then even at the end, when he realizes that it's not actually him that's talking to him, someone else. So there's so many, that scene is amazing. And that to me is why I would rank it possibly even higher than Homecoming, because Homecoming doesn't have that scene. Homecoming has some very good scenes, but it doesn't have a scene that good. So I can see rating it above, but it's a big gap between those two, which I thought was surprising.
I'm glad you said that, because I had Far From Home 9 and Homecoming 11. So obviously Homecoming I ranked it higher than the average, and I'm with you. I went back and forth with this because I think ultimately the Far From Home I landed as being the better of the two, because kind of like you, I get a little sappy and I get kind of sucked into the whole mourning of Tony Stark and kind of that whole dynamic, and with Happy
right.
and Peter Parker, and I mean, again, when I think about it, I'm like, you know what, that's one of my favorite, just as really when you think about it, it's not really a big huge part of the universe, but that relationship between Stark and Peter. And
that's why that relationship is the reason Endgame happened, right? Because Tony said no, and then he was like, all right, if I can bring this kid back, that'll be enough. You know what I mean? So it wasn't, when he saw Cap the first time, it wasn't, we lost. It wasn't, we whatever. It was, I lost the kid. You know what I mean? That was what he was concerned about more than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of those things where that relationship was hugely important to the universe. And like you said, it's a smaller part of it, but it drove Tony to do what he did,
Well, and exactly, because it's that's the thing that, like you said, just really pushes him over the edge, and, gets him into that, okay, I'm going to figure everything out type of mode that he gets into. And then again, talking about the other Spider-Man, this is why I like them both so much. And think about that first one, Homecoming, where he's, kind of playing that father figure role, which I love because, again, the characters, the actors, everything about the whole dynamic is great. I think they really nailed it. You can't just write lines and have random people say these and have it have the same effect. They just both really kind of just nailed it. I love the, and this, I read this once. I love the scene where they're in his room and Tony Stark turns to him because he's like sitting on the bed. And he's like, "Move your leg. I'm going to sit there." I guess that was a kind of a on the fly type of line because what's his face was supposed to move and he didn't. He was just like, "Move your leg. I'm going to sit down." And it's just those little things where it's like I key in on those and I just laugh. And like you said, if the movie still after umpteen million times that you've seen it still gets you on the certain things like that, that's when you know it's really good. So,
Tony. Yeah. Downey's been ad-libbing, right, for the whole thing. I mean, the fact that, and I'm sure everyone knows this by now, but the fact that I Am Iron Man was ad-libbed and was not the original thing that he was supposed to say in that meeting. And imagine if he doesn't say that. Like, what does the MCU look like if he doesn't say that? If he, if his identity isn't known as Iron Man, because the next two movies are based on the fact that everyone knows he's Iron Man. And really the ramifications of everything that happens is because he's Tony Stark and Iron Man. Like, that's the whole MCU is based around that. So like, if he doesn't do that, that changes everything, so it's like, it's kind of crazy. And he wasn't supposed to do that. So he just ad-libbed it once. And then they were like, whoa, that's cool. Like, let's do that, and like, it changed the entire course of the MCU, just that one moment.
Fast forward 11 years later. Endgame. Yeah. I mean, and again, in a stretch of, the start of that fight, I mean, just that, I'm thinking about it now, and I'm like, I'm going to be up until 4 o'clock in the morning watching Endgame today, apparently. But I'm sitting here thinking, just that whole stretch from everyone returning, on your left, the whole, you get chills just thinking about it. And it's movies, folks. I understand it. But you're listening to this show because you probably enjoy this stuff like we do. So, like, you get these chills, you get these feelings. But that, from there to the point where he snaps his fingers and it's like you see it coming because, you get the one from Doctor Strange. And, all of a sudden it's like the snap with nothing. You get nothing and Thanos is confused, and then you just the way that ended, and to think that having that line just was fantastic because, you get the I am inevitable, then you get, no, I'm Iron Man, and to think if that never happened, obviously I'm pretty sure they would have figured something out maybe if they got to that point, but it seems too perfect not to have that right now. So I
agree.
It definitely is a bummer that you're not going to get that character in its full capacity anymore. I know there was at one point, maybe a couple months ago, there was a bit of a, I don't know if you want to call it a movement, but a social media a push to get him back. And I'm like, no, just stop it. Look, if you bring it back, you completely ruin everything that you've already done. So, as much
that's the hard part, right? That's the hard part, right? Is that you look at it and say, like, it has to matter. Like, it has to matter, and that's why Natasha dies. Like, it has to matter. Like, she sacrificed herself to win. Now you can't now bring her back because that cheapens the sacrifice. Yep. You can't bring Tony back because he sacrificed himself to save everyone. Like, that makes the sacrifice not as powerful because we reversed it. Like, no, it's and people are talking about, Black Panther, and they're like, well, they could bring back Killmonger. And it's like, they could, but do you really want to? Like, I know he was really great in that role. He was, but like, that end scene in that movie where he basically says, like, bury me in the ocean with my ancestors, like, because they knew that, death is better than bondage. Like, that moment is amazing, and then you cheapen that by bringing him back. It's like, don't do that, So, and they've been good about not doing stuff like that, and so it's kind of like, that's let it be. Like, if it's harder moving forward, then it's harder moving forward. Like, it is what it is. You had a great run, Like, if the MCU fizzles out in another 10 years, then it fizzles out. Like, what are you gonna do? But like, don't ruin it by bringing those guys back. It's not worth it.
Well, and the good thing is too, you didn't